And start the recording for this morning's making the best use of work experience and placements, both internal and external. It's an e-memoir session, and we're joined by Beej Kaczmarczyk of the Learning Curve Group and Sue Martin, an independent consultant. We like to keep the session as interactive as possible, so please keep the questions coming. Thank you very much, and over to you, Beej and Sue.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Marek. And just for those of you that might be new to our webinar series, there will be a recording of this and the slides, which will be sent to you in the course of today. So you will have a record which you can share, obviously, with colleagues in your own organisation. I'm being joined this morning by Sue Martin, independent consultant. Sue, would you like to say good morning to everyone?
Good morning, everybody. Lovely to be here in this nice sunny summer's day with the rain pouring down outside, and I'm hoping to share some good experience this morning, some great examples I've seen of work experience being implemented effectively in study programmes.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sue. And as you can see, Sue is an independent consultant who's worked with many colleges as well as helped them in pre-inspection, preparation, etc. For those that have not met me before, I'm a director at the Learning Curve Group, and in the course of the next hour or so, I just want to share my perceptions from the point of view of being a strategic leader. I'm a governor of a large FE college as well, and obviously experience in the last 3 years of planning, preparing, designing, delivering study programs, and in particular the work experience and work placement elements of study programs, in study programs and also in traineeships. And good morning to our subscribers and those that are new and hopefully will take up a subscription as a result. I think the start point is just to remind you, and I know it's going back, but it is quite critical that when you look at work experience and work placements in study programs and traineeships, it's how well those work experience activities meet the requirements of a study program. So just to remind you that all 16 to 19-year-olds, whether it be full-time, part-time, and of course this extends to 19 to 24-year-olds that have got learning difficulty assessments or education healthcare plans, are entitled to a study program, which in many cases is going to be a full-time program of at least 540 hours planned over an academic year, that includes a core learning aim, which is normally described as a vocational learning aim, level 2, level 3 diploma, or an academic program made up of ASs and of course A-levels, and in some cases combinations that best reflect the destination or likely destination of that student, as well as obviously English and Maths for those that have not already achieved the grade A star to C or 5 to 9. And what is critical, of course, and there was absolutely fundamental to the design principles which are in study programs, is the delivery of personal enrichment, pastoral, and preparation for the world of work elements, which can have a mixture of qualifications and non-qualifications, but primarily is based around tutorial enrichment, other sort of activities to do with enrichment, such as sport, careers guidance, etc. And the focus of today is work experience. Now, as you know, when you plan the study program for each individual learner, under the quite critical assumption that all study programs are individualized, is that you will then plan the hours for that particular learner, that particular student, with regard to their start point, what they come in with, what their expected destination is, whether it be into further study, higher education, and of course increasingly into work, to employment, preferably with an apprenticeship, is to show the hours that you're going to put into the study program, and those are planned hours. Now, those planned hours can include all those activities which we mentioned, which are not necessarily leading to qualifications. I think one critical thing to note is that there seems to be concern, certainly in the part of some inspectors, that what providers have done is planned the hours for work placements more to sort of deliver a component of the hours, so to get the students up to 540 hours or closer to the 600 hours on average that's expected. But there's been less regard for the quality of those hours, the appropriateness of those hours, and the relevance of those hours of work experience or work preparation to either the student's intended destination or the more likely destination they have after some period of time on the study program. So it's not just about fulfilling the requirement to put work experience hours into a planned program of study, particularly if you're contributing to Band 5, which is the 16 and 17-year-olds expectation to be full-time, 540 planned hours, timetabled and planned over the year, as well as for those students who are 18 over that have got high needs. And now we know that well over 85% of the student enrollments are on Band 5 or Band 4 if those students are 18 and over. So it's not just about saying I need to put on 30 hours or 35 hours or whatever number of hours to make sure the student gets up to that minimum of 540 or that minimum of 450. What is much more relevant is what's the significance of those hours, what's the relevance of those hours that are assigned to work preparation, work experience, including placements, and how are those particular hours and that activity going to help deliver the destination, the intended outcome for the student. And of course, with much more focus on outcomes as opposed to what goes into the program, what's the outcome of the program in terms of not only in terms of achievement of qualifications, it is quite critical that you have that view from the very beginning. So it's not just about filling the planned hours to make sure that you maximize your funding. So the key principles that relate to study programs and that aspect of study programs that's about work preparation and work experience, and these are quite clear if you look at the guidance from the Department for Education, other activities not necessarily related to qualifications that develop skills, attitudes and confidence that support progression. And that should be the underlying principle that guides the type of work experience, the design of the work experience, the length of the work experience, and the relevance of that work experience for each individual student. And that includes A-level students who, again, might not be directly progressing to employment, but certainly would be looking to make sure that they make the right choices of, for example, higher education programs of further study that then allow them to go into the appropriate employment. And as Ofsted has said quite clearly in its guidance, and I particularly focus on the handbook for further education and skills sector, is that purposeful work-related learning, particularly where it's relevant to be external, that's with an external employer, external to the premises of your organization, is quite critical. So you can see that the relevance of it from the point of view of the policy is very clear. However, there's a significant amount of support also for why work experience should be a key element in any young person's program of study. Look at UCSS, which says that what's quite critical here is that relevant work experience was rated by 66% of recruiting employers being a critical significant factor to look for in candidates. So whenever you're looking at effective strategies to engage employers in providing good quality work placements, is this: make sure you look at their plans, their HR plans, because one of the key benefits of work placements to employers, which you should be stressing when you're actually promoting work placements to them, is that this can give them access to a pool of talent and help with recruitment. Pearson and CDI study also showed that many people felt, that young people felt particularly, that they were not able to acquire the skills they needed, citing work experience as being one of the main weaknesses. So any program that doesn't develop those appropriate skills, which we often call the softer skills, but I think in effect they're the ones that employers are looking for, the hard skills of team working, communication, personal effectiveness, personal personal skills that relate to things like being able to get to work on time and appearance are absolutely critical. But I think there was also some good research being done, particularly on supported employment, relevant to those young people at 16 up to the age of 24 who might have special education needs and or disabilities. What was found is absolutely critical for those learners, and again this is quite critical when Ofsted are looking at you. If you're putting on a study program provision where the work experience is not being extended to all learners, irrespective of their individual needs, you're actually missing something that's quite critical. And I think this is quite significant in terms of equality and equal access. And what was cited there is quite critical. Is good work experience can often be the key to the door of a good job after leaving education. The more contact a young person has with the workplace, the more likely to find employment. And that is absolutely critical. And that's what one of the major justifications for example, supported internships and other forms of assistance that might provide in terms of supported employment. So there's the, if you want, the requirements of the study program to put on work experience. There's also what I say is the critical advantages or benefits that you can acquire that come from good quality work experience placements inside study programs. And one of the things that I know one of you has already asked me is, how do we develop an employer engagement strategy? Well, myself and Sue will come to that later on, and a big part of our sort of conclusion. So in terms of what the Department for Education is looking for, it has clear purposes for work experience. That's why it wants to see, and through Ofsted it will check that that happens, as well as through obviously other means. It will want to make sure that we have the opportunity for those people who seek to go into employment or into further study which needs an understanding of the world of work, is to make sure that they have that time as part of their study program. And that's because it's bridging that gap between education and the world of work, which by the way can be done through a whole set of job preparation and work experience activities, such as shadowing, projects, live projects, study visits and guest speakers. They all make part of that whole preparing, understanding the world of work and being obviously prepared for the world of work. So again, if you're new to and have got this responsibility for example, implementing work experience across your organisation as part of study programs, look no further than Ofsted guidance on best practice in work experience and placements, and obviously the DFE as well. What I think is critical is when you design work experience is to have clarity in your mind about what type of work experience you're actually providing for that individual student. Now, whether it be a week of work experience or several weeks of work experience or a day a week or a half day a week, the design of the appropriate work experience should not be the same for every individual learner, because they have different demands on the time, as do employers. So, for example, when the downtime for employers, for example, when they've got quite a lot of staff on summer holidays or breaks, for example, in July and August, that could be, again, an ideal time to put on work experience. It's using the flexibility of the workplace matched to the flexibility of increasing the way that you run your academic year. But whichever type of work experience you provide, and as you know there are 3 types, it's critical each of those is appropriate to the needs of that individual learner. So for example, where it's their core aim, for example on a traineeship or a supported internship, that will most likely require a much longer period of work placement, possibly the equivalent to say 2 or 3 days a week, because that would be the primary learning outcome that you're seeking from that student. And the expectation would be that that traineeship or in supported internship for a young person with individual needs is that would be to prepare them for the world of work. Unfortunately, what we found with traineeships, and you know there's been quite a lot of discussion about that, is a large proportion of students have gone through quite significant work experience on traineeships, have not actually progressed into apprenticeships, but tended to go much more onto further study. But nevertheless, you know, that is still an important route into employment. The second type of work experience is where it's an essential part of the vocational qualification. So without doing a substantial period of work experience, whether it be 1 placement, 2 placements or 3 placements, for example for early years educators, then that is a component part of the qualification, and that's got to be dealt with in a different way from where it's the core aim. But the most common type of work experience is where it's offered as an enrichment activity either to a vocational student or to an academic student. And I think what's critical, and this is clearly what inspectors are looking for, is that for 1 and 2 in particular, there you should make sure that that is with an external employer, external to the learning environment and an external site. However, it is appropriate in some cases to use internal work experience, and we'll talk about the appropriateness of that in a few moments. For those students whose primary driver might be higher education and further study, please be aware again, external work experience is not an automatic expectation. Some other type of experience, such as say a study visit, such as shadowing, guest speakers, live projects might be more appropriate. But there again, if a student who says I want to go into, for example, chemical engineering for a degree, I want to know what the industry looks like, then obviously finding an appropriate work placement, which would be preferably external, is important there. Nevertheless, and there's been quite a lot of what I'd call noise around what we call internal or simulated work experience, that can be included if it meets the conditions. In other words, it's purposeful, and the young person gains from the experience. And the most important thing they can gain from an internal work experience, say in say a college hairdressing salon, or in a cafe that you run in your school or college, or in, say, a workshop, is that that does help to prepare them for an external work placement, so using it appropriately. And as you know, on the school census data or the ILR, there are ways in which you can record the number of hours that a person does on an internal work placement and the number of hours they can do in an external work placement. Now, I know that I've had a question already. Thank you very much. There's a question. In our institution, we've been told that the only type of work experience that can count is external, but that is not true, because follow the guidance inside the funding guidance, follow the guidance inside Ofsted, internal or simulated work experience, where it's appropriate, and I'll show you later on it's appropriate, can be used specifically, especially if it's used to build the confidence and skills of the person, the young person, so that you can then place them with an external work placement. In some rare occasions, it might be the only type of experience you can provide, and I'll explain why later on. So, in each case, therefore, if it's the core learning aim, such as where you've got it as a traineeship or as an internship, then wherever possible, you can use a mixture of what I call work preparation, which can include a simulation if you wish, or an internal work placement, but the key learning aim will tend to be, and the bulk of the hours will tend to be an external work placement where it's appropriate. And I think obviously this is quite critical to make sure the person is being prepared for possibly an apprenticeship. And I know that some of you are using traineeship as a pre-apprenticeship program. We might change the titles in future, by the way. I think there's much more sense in calling them pre-apprenticeships, because that at least directs the students a little bit more into the apprenticeship route, whereas preparation for a further study might be another route that's taken. Again, you can record the core learning in there in terms of the total number of hours that you associate with the work placement. That would be the majority of hours. And it's recorded using one of the 5 work experience learning aims. But for most people on traineeships, it's between about 100 and 240 hours that you would see allocated to this as the core learning aim. We'll come back to an example of that later on. Where it's an essential part of the vocational qualification, for example, where it's an essential part of, say, the early years qualification, then here it's part of the hours that you allocate to the qualification. It would not appear in the employability, enrichment, and pastoral hours. So you don't duplicate it by putting it into the hours for the qualification. So if you're doing 700 hours for a level 3 diploma in the first year in early years, if that includes 400 hours of work placement, then that would be included in the qualification hours, but not also in the employability, enrichment, and pastoral hours. So again, there's no requirement to record that using one of the... Now you can see the essential part of it. Finding employers for this has been something that you've pretty well experienced already. Those have been running early years, health and social care programs, or for example, catering programs. You are already quite experienced at engaging employers, and the students will know that it's a key component. The engagement of the student, because it's a key component without which they cannot pass the qualification, is a lot easier. So I think, again, using those 2 strategies of having already got that range of employers that are familiar with that, as well as the engagement with the students, is a lot easier. Where it's a lot more difficult is particularly around work experience of the 3rd type, which is seen as part of the enrichment activities. And again here, this is adding value only if that's negotiated with the individual learner, and it enables them, for example, to explore a career or a subject. In some cases, as Sue will say later on, one of the big benefits is that on occasions this will help them to explore a potential vocational route, which they might at the end of the work placement discount because they're not really fit for it, or it's not fit for them. Here it's important that you record this in using one of the 5 codes, the work experience codes. And by the way, on the ILR, there's a question that's been posed, thanks very much. How do you record internal work placements or simulation on the ILR? If you go to the codes for work experience, they use one of the 5 codes. I'll show you those codes in a minute. One of those codes relates to how many hours the planned activity is. It doesn't matter how you do it, but you often show the planned start date and the planned end date of the work placement and the hours that are required using one of the codes, because it's a band of hours. Then internal work placements have got a separate identifier from external work placements. One's got number 1 and one's got the number 2. Again, talk that through with your MI team and they'll guide you on that. So as I've said, internal work experience, where it's appropriate, I think does add a lot of value. Now, partly because it builds the student confidence. We know certainly with some younger students that trying to put them into work placement when they're not ready can be not good for the learner, not good for the employer. So by developing some of those, what I'd call the softer skills, the confidence and employability skills, for example, in an office situation in the college, school canteen, hairdressing salon, or the organization's creche, will actually give them the confidence, and then you'll use that to obviously allocate an appropriate external placement for them. It is also quite appropriate to use it where it's known as a hazardous occupation. So for example, our colleagues in land-based will often use what's there available in the land-based institution because you can't place those learners with the restrictions that might be in an external location, an external farm, and similarly that applies also to construction. One thing to note, by the way, is irrespective of the number of hours, whichever band, if you offer an internal work placement, if it's the only work placement you offer, you can only use that code which ends with 834, which is the lowest of the hours that you can allocate to it. So remember, it's a planned number of hours. Where you're using an internal work placement and then an external work placement to follow, or several to follow, each one of those will have separate number of hours allocated to it. Now, from Ofsted's perspective, have a good look at the handbook. They're looking for evidence that where you're using an internal work placement, a simulation, it's been purposeful, and how has it helped the learner to gain from the experience. So the obvious thing you can say there is that they're a more successful external work placement would be one of the benefits there as well. Now, again, I know that one or two of you have avoided this issue because you just don't call them internal work placement, you just call them work preparation. That's okay, as long as those hours actually happened and they meet the requirements of audit and it's part of the study program, it's less of an issue. So there's a lot of flexibility around how you do this. Now, can I just check, how many of you listening in today are also offering traineeships as part of study programs for 16 to 19-year-olds? Can we just get a quick show of hands? Yeah, we've got some show of hands there. Thanks very much. We've got quite a fair number, certainly more than we've had in the past. Thank you. Yeah, good. That's great. Thank you. So here you can see that the work preparation, which can include job preparation, employability skills, CV writing, and an internal work placement where it's appropriate, or simulation, but the majority of the hours would actually be an external work placement, as I said, somewhere between 100 and 240 hours. That could be more than one placement, by the way. It's about preparing that person more than likely to that job, that occupation, that employer that you've tried to match them with, as well as offering obviously any vocational qualifications as well as functional skills in English and maths, or where you've got very short work placements, at least some evidence that they've improved their maths and English skills. Now, as I said earlier, and one of you, I think John has asked the question, a lot of people have gone through traineeships where the substantial element has been the work placement, haven't actually then progressed to employment, they've not progressed to, what do you call it, for example, to an apprenticeship. What we mean by further study is they might go, for example, from having an entry-level qualification to a level 1 or a level 1 to a level 2. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the same vocational area, John. It could be that they've tried something in catering and it's not really for them and they prefer maybe to go into IT or business. Then that doesn't really matter, as long as there's progression to further study. And that further study can also be even at the same level but a bigger type of qualification. If all they've had is qualifications at award and certificate and now they progress to complete a full diploma, that would be seen as further study. So as long as you record those outcomes, John, they will all be seen as positive. You know, and there are 3 positive outcomes: progression to further study, as defined by the way I've just described, progression to employment, and progression to an apprenticeship. So hopefully that will be achieved. I've just noticed we've got oh, thank you, that's answered that question. Thank you. So if you look at the work experience, these are the EFA codes that we use. When we're talking about with the skills funding agency, we tend to be looking at bigger numbers of hours available. But you can see there that if you've got, for example, a person on a traineeship of 200 hours, and that is 200 hours of external work placement, and you only have one work placement, you'd be using the code that ends with 837. Remember, these are your planned hours, and it's a range of hours. So I think you'll be familiar with those. So let's have just a couple of examples of what types of work placement or work experience appears on some study programs. Here's a level 2 learner. This would be a learner who would be more than likely in a college or a school or a training provider. You can see there that they'd be full-time. They've got over 540 hours. Their vocational program is 408 hours, which doesn't have a compulsory element of work placement. But down there you can see work preparation and experience. So that's 35 hours of working in a realistic work environment. We'd assume that's in the college, the training provider school, salon, hairdressing, catering or something like that. But it also includes 35 hours with an external employer. Now there's absolutely no restriction on how you run that 35 hours. It could be one whole week of work placement. It could be spread over 10 weeks. It's whatever is appropriate to that learner and that employer. And that flexibility in the way in which you organize them is absolutely critical. I think one of the key things I've got, and I always say this, where I include any element of preparation, which can be a simulation, I am only using that to build the confidence. This is not going to be for most of our learners, and this I think in response to Colette, the only element of experience of the world of work they have. So where I've seen it really work is where you're using it as a preparation for that external work placement. And in most cases, that's what happens, especially if it's carefully constructed so as to be, suitable for that young person and suitable for the circumstances they find themselves in. So if you find that it's very difficult to place people, for example, there might be age restrictions. So in some sectors, you can't actually take up employment until you're 18. Well, you have to run some kind of other type of a more appropriate offer. And I think what's critical, and this is in response to Colette's question, is that you have a justification for doing it. So certainly we found that much easier where there's what I call hazardous elements, for example in construction, where that might not be appropriate for that person. So as long as you've got a justification and you can show how the person's benefited in any of the ways we've described, say, such as growing in confidence, developing employability skills, and the most important type of benefit is if you can then show that the person used that work placement, whether it be internal or external, to progress to a job or to a job preferably with an apprenticeship. So I think that would be quite significant. What I think is critical is that more emphasis is now put on the outcomes of a work placement, and that is going to be critical in you showing the value of work placement both to young people as part of their engagement, but also with employers. One thing I think is important is to record the types of benefits that employers actually get from a work placement. It's very, very rarely done. Now, quite a lot of work experience placement providers, employers, have often said they can see no direct benefit to themselves until you start to unpick what happened during the work placement and start to say, well, now we've got a better appreciation of the skills that young people have or don't have. Or that's told us a lot about the things we should be doing with our other staff. I've also put in an example of a traineeship. Again, here you can show that the work placement, in this case this was an external work placement, was the bulk of the hours. And of course what we'd be expecting to see at the end of that is where did that young person go? Did they go into further study, for example at level 2, or did they go into employment, in this case in this particular sector, which is retail, and preferably if they went to employment, did they then go on to an apprenticeship? And again, keeping outcome data, performance data from any type of work placement is critical in terms of what I think is the future direction here. And particularly when you're looking at contributions that you're making to getting young people into work. So just some clarifications in addition to those that have already been posed. Remember, for supported internships, how many of you are running supported internships? Remember, these are much longer periods of work experience for young people up to the age of 24. In some cases, they will be 25 when they finish them, that have either learning difficulty assessments, but one, just a couple of them. What is critical there is they must have a minimum of 6 months work experience. It doesn't mean 6 months of 5 days, it's just 6 months. So it could be 2 days, 3 days a week. I know in some cases it's 4 days a week in the Bagnall College 1 day. One little bit of advice, part-time jobs do not meet the criteria for planned hours because the primary purpose is earning, not learning. Although I know one of you has already posed the question, if you help to find the person a part-time job, and that also counts in terms of being with an external employer, and you record the outcomes and you support the young person, then I think it's a slightly different definition. There are some students, by the way, where you found them the work placement and actually the employer has not just paid expenses, in some cases they've paid them a wage. Well, that's a private decision between the young person and the employer. We've got a question from one of you who is a local authority provider. Hopefully that question is now answered. If you're part of a local authority, the training arm, and you place that young person, say, in public works or in social services or in parks and recreation, then that counts as external work placement, because obviously it's with a slightly different, it is external to the site they would normally be at. And again, you can have more than one placement. Remember, if you look at the ILR, the way it records placements is exactly that way, about when they start and when they finish. But one of the issues about, and Gordon's raised this question about how finding appropriate work experience placements for in rural areas, because that's a lot more difficult than in what do you call it, urban areas. One of the issues this has raised is obviously is the availability of transport and support for those learners, and again I'll pick that up as one of the what I call the critical design features. But again, it's how you work with both employers and young people. And Jeanette's asked this question. We're going to look at how you engage with them, because I see it much more as about a strategy of employer engagement. I think what adds value to any work placement plan and strategy, and I don't know, Sue, would you like to add here, is that this also is part of your more broader employer engagement strategy. Would you agree, Sue?
Absolutely, and I think it comes back to some of the things you were talking about earlier on, really, that the work experience element of the study programme, we know has created some challenges for colleagues, but it's one of those things that it is a holistic approach. So the planning needs to start early on, and I think a lot of providers do have more employer links than they actually realise. So working more with you on the relationships with the existing employers, I think would pay dividends, really. So the whole element of the work experience being connected to the employer engagement, I think would bring some benefits for a lot of people.
That's great, thanks for that. That supports some of the things that we'll show later on. Don't forget there's a wider range of work preparation activities which of course could be more appropriate for those learners, for example academic learners, who have got no real desire to move straight into employment but would need some experience of the world of work. Remember, work experience is experience of the world of work, in the world of work, and for the world of work. And that's a much broader definition, which can include, of course, those work placements. In response to one other question, by the way, there's nothing to prevent you having different periods of work placements. You can have them early, you can have them late, as long as you record them, record the number of hours using one of the appropriate codes, because we'll know from the ILR that they have different start date and end date. So some can happen in February, some can happen in October, some can happen in July, some can happen in August. We've seen work placements offered in August, even though the students technically finished their program. The thing is, it's more appropriate to have the planned end date for the work experience inside. So again, use the planned end date that says that by the time that person finishes the work experience, which could be the first week in August, or sorry, should not say the first week in August, but the last week in July, you can say that's the planned end date for that particular academic year. So if I've got a student who finished their course of study at the end of year one, but the work placement occurs in, say, the last 3 weeks of July, the planned end date for that, as Sue said, for that planned year, for that young learner, will be the 31st of July. So again, it's using the freedoms and flexibilities, and there's nothing wrong with having a planned end date where most of the study is finished, but the student work placement doesn't go on, goes on beyond it, because the study program runs from the 1st of August to the 31st of July. It depends on the needs of the student and the way you've organized it. So, Sue, if that's the requirements from the point of view of study programs, particularly when you design it to meet the 3 different types, what is the view certainly from Ofsted?
I think, as we've spoken about previously, most colleagues now know that we've got a very different approach to the new Common Inspection Framework, and it is holistic. It's a word we keep using quite a lot at the moment, but I think it sums up nicely how different the inspection framework is. Most people know, obviously, that we're inspecting different types of provision. So, for example, the study programme, the different elements of that programme will actually be looked at. The shorter inspections have obviously been introduced, shorter inspection intervals rather, for the good schools and colleges. And we've also got the new area of the personal development, behaviour and welfare. That, as you can see, if you actually look through the inspection handbook, you can see reference to that again in each of the different areas. And what's particularly nice this morning to hear is the fact that we are developing the young person's skills in order to prepare them for the next stage of their life, and this is where the work experience element becomes so critical. It's not just about giving them a little taste of working with an external employer, but it's very, very important that we are actually developing those skills and the behaviours that are inspected in the workplace. As you know, the leadership and management judgment will include the effectiveness of the safeguarding arrangements, and as previously we have got a reliance on the different dashboard, the KPIs to monitor performance, and again that will actually throw up any concerns where intervention might be needed for inspectors to actually pay a visit. So if we look at the expectations of the work experience, what we see, if you go back to the handbook and you look, you find that work experience is looked at through the various different aspects. So, for example, I just mentioned that PDBW, which I find incredibly difficult to say, we've got to make sure that the learners have actually got those attitudes and the attributes that would be required if you were actually going to be in employment. When you're actually planning the external work placement as well, I think it's critical that colleagues do have the conversation with the employers and make sure that on both sides that there is a realistic expectation, not only for what the learner can achieve, but also is it right for them to be looking at certain elements. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Beej, when you were saying that the work experience has got to be purposeful. So there has been some confusion, I think, and maybe people have misunderstood the different guidance, but I think as time has gone on and we've had more inspections, if you read through the reports, you can see that even if a student is doing the internal work experience, which I think is a fabulous opportunity for learners, the expectation to do external as well is still there. So again, I go back to the point of the planning, which if you start from the point of in the academic year of when providers are actually doing their curriculum planning, the planning for the work experience needs to be included there, and not just an opportunity to fill up the hours so that the study programme becomes, you know, a higher banding or something. So inspectors will look at whether the work experience is purposeful, is it planned, and again we all know that plans change, so that's fine, but I think it's important to show from the beginning that the planning has actually taken place. I'm a big advocate of using ProMonitor to actually record the type of work experience as well, and that can be a really, really useful tool for both internal and external work experience. So if we look at some of the other areas that the inspections will be covering, the teaching and learning aspect, teaching and learning assessment, again we'll look at how well the students on the work experience are supported to achieve in different types of learning environment, and it will also, I think, provide an opportunity to make sure that what the learning that has taken place is relevant. So again, when the inspectors talk to the students, they will be asking them if they've actually had the opportunity to attend work experience, if they've been involved in any of that as well, and make sure that anything that's organised is actually relevant to the individual learner. Again, everything ties in quite beautifully to the way that you track the learner, the individual goals and the targets that you might put into their ILP. The leadership and management element, again, also looks at the provision of work experience, and it goes back to what I just said. If that work experience is purposeful and the student is actually gaining from it, and it ties back into their learning program, ties back into the study program, then that will be seen as good practice. If it's just a case of, well, we'll put those hours in just to take us up to the higher band, then again that would not be seen as something that would be very beneficial for the learner. And I think what's important is to make sure that there is a consistent approach across the organisation as well, so that everybody understands what's required to for the learner to take place in a work experience, but also if you're using the internal element, how that's going to progress the learner onto the next stage. And again, as you mentioned, Beej, make sure that they have got the skills and the confidence to actually go into an external placement or the work experience. So if we look at working with the employers then, as we mentioned, engagement with the employers is really, really key. And I spoke earlier and said that I think organisations have got far more opportunity and far more relationships that are pretty well established going on than sometimes that they realise. So a lot of colleagues will be working in areas where the work experience or an external placement has been custom and practice, it's part of the qualification. But that can also have spin-offs. So for example, you may find that the people in the early years department know of some other opportunities, employers know each other. So where you've got employer forums taking place in an organisation, that does actually provide the opportunity to extend those relationships and get more employers involved as well. So when we've got the realistic working environments taking place, such as you might again have the salons, you've got the restaurants, some people will have a florist shop, they are brilliant places to actually develop the students' internal skills, to actually get them involved, having some dialogue with customers and having the whole interaction with people, members of the public, because as we know, there are less opportunities now for young people to actually gain any experience in the world of work unless they have a part-time job. But again, that is not necessarily going to be relevant to their programme of study. So in schools, in the pre-16 students don't necessarily get involved in work experience anymore. So they come to the post-16 learning and they actually have not been exposed to that world of work. So sometimes we, as post-16 providers, expect a lot of our young people, and I think it's important that we've got those internal facilities to actually enable them to develop, build the confidence skills, be able to talk to people, look them in the eye, you know, turn up on time, those usual things, and make sure that when they do go out into an external placement that they're confident and both the employer and the student will actually get something out of it. And I do think it's very important that the discussion takes place with the employer so that they know what's involved, they also know what's expected of them, and a plan is created which is actually relevant and again realistic to the young people. Whenever the young person is in a work experience, I think again it's critical that there's some sort of log of activity takes place. I've seen some colleagues use the external work experience opportunity as a way to build on the stretch and challenge. So you may have, for example, a learner that's been doing a particular project and then they have got the opportunity to go in the relevant work experience, they can build on that project and actually gain a deeper understanding. For example, I've seen things in like that take place within the media areas and art and design, where that can actually be quite difficult to get some of the employers involved. And what one college has done very successfully is to include design briefs. So the employer will sort of approach the college and explain what it is that they want to actually cover. The student then creates and produces the goods and comes up with a real project for the employer, and then they have the work experience and they take that one stage further. So that is a fantastic opportunity to not only engage employers, give the students the opportunity for a realistic brief, but also then to extend their learning. So I think, Beej, you're going to just mention some of the problems that I know colleagues have experienced in getting hold of really good work experience placements.
That's right, and I just want to reiterate and just support a couple of things, because obviously clearly if the progression is to apprenticeships, it is critical to have an external placement. But also it's critical where you are trying to pursue a particular, if you want, link with an employer. And you mentioned this, Sue, is even in the rural areas, if you already have placements, I would always say in rural areas, make sure that 1 and 2 are both met. So those students who are doing a traineeship get a work placement is essential, and those students who is an essential part of their vocational qualification, they would be your priorities. And as long as you prioritise those learners, then obviously it would be understandable if it's more difficult to get high quality work placements for those learners where it's purely part of the enrichment. So that's one, it's not a brilliant strategy, but it certainly would satisfy that you've met those requirements of the study programme. I think obviously that relates also to the use of transport and providing at least some support for transport. Again, that's using a scarce budget. One thing I found quite useful in some rural areas is using the most local of the employer in terms of their links with you, which could be primary schools, the local authority, the local health authority, where within that village or within that town, within close proximity, is a range of work placements which are relevant to the person's vocational area, for example, admin and IT, but then can be used in different contexts. For example, the use of IT on a farm, the use of IT in a doctor's surgery, the use of IT in a primary school. So I think it's also being a little bit more creative in terms of engaging different forms of employers for those occupational areas which are quite general. One other point just before we move on to the problems, because I know you've raised quite a lot of problems, thank you, as we've been going along, is obviously fitting work preparation and experience into the 600 hours is difficult. And I know that one of you has asked me the question about, well, what happens if you put on work placements after, for example, they finished their vocational or academic study? Well, I would suggest if you knew that was going to happen, for example, because the availability of work placements to cover summer holidays, then I would make sure that by week 6, when I actually put on the ILR, the planned end date for that learner, the planned end date would include the extension to their study through the work placement. In other words, rather than put the first week in July, put the last week in July, because that's when the 2 weeks of the work placement or the week of the work placement will happen. Now, in terms of making sure that the health and safety and all the safeguarding arrangements in place, if you know you're going to be using that employer, hopefully that's already been done because it's a repeat. If not, then to make sure that's done before the end of the, when you've got the availability of staff. Again, if you're in the sixth-form college or a school, that might be more difficult because staff expect to sort of finish around a certain point. However, I found what works best is I use all the assessors. So every one of our assessors who is assessing people on frameworks and standards, such as apprenticeships, also has a brief to check out work placements, for health and safety and fitness and such safeguarding arrangements, but also they help to find the work placements. So I use the assessor workforce, which we've got an extensive number. It's part of the job description. They have that as an accountability. It does actually help. And just one other point, part-time jobs normally don't. As I said, the only exception would be where you find a person a work placement, you've organised it, you report it, you check it, you liaise with the employer, and the employer happens to pay the person. So again, it's not normal. So I think that's a response to the question. One other question was, does it help? If you've got a shortage of placements, What about the students finding their own work placements? The only bit of advice there is only if it's appropriate to that student's destination. So, you know, having a student's really interested in doing medicine, having a week at Sainsbury's or a week working in a bicycle shop might not be the best experience for them. Better than nothing, but again, it's trying to get that appropriateness of match. So again, it's useful for the students to, if they do find their own placements, do they go into a job bank? What I've seen work well in some institutions is all work placements, the ones you find, the ones that assessors find, the ones that staff find, the ones that students find, go into the job bank, and then they're matched against those students. So even if I find a work placement, I might not take it up because it might be appropriate for someone else and vice versa. I think it's important that you do realise how important that balance is. It's about trying to make sure that whatever the person does in terms of qualification is matched by the fact that they need to enhance it with their English and Maths, with their work experience, because the biggest barrier to a lot of people getting progression to employment is not the lack of the vocational qualification, it's the lack of English and Maths and appropriate work experience. I'll show you some of the ways in we get round commitment from students, staff and employers, because that's been raised as a significant issue, as well as the availability of high quality work experience placements. But again, I think when we're looking for creativity, for example, I'm working with a college next week where all the middle managers are going to sit down and we're going to try and generate somewhere around 2,500 to 3,000 work placements for next year through some kind of collective thing, through bringing all those things together. And as Sue said, it's all the different departments, business development, employee engagement, apprenticeships, all have got different types of content. We use the CRM, the customer relations management software, to actually tell us where all the available placements are that we've used over the last 10 years, but also where have we got people, employers who send in students to us for work, for what do you call it, day release or block release. I think it's getting the right staff to support the placements, and I think that's another issue that's been raised. Is this left to one person, or is it across college or across institution responsibility? The most successful work experience that you've seen in inspection reports is where it's a whole college approach, it's holistic, as Sue said, and the commitment comes from the very top. So again, we've seen inconsistent practice. You know, look at the most recent inspection reports. So some poorly planned work experience, not fit for purpose, not purposeful, but just seemingly filling up the hours. And I think the other problem I've noticed is that the link that, as Sue said, the learning on the work experience in some cases is not recorded, and in some cases does not relate to the course study. That would be seen as a significant weakness. And again, there are ways to using ProMonitor for planning, etc., that you can show that. I think the concern over auditable evidence is less of an issue, but nevertheless, as one or two of you have said, what can we use? Can we use internal, external? How do we record it? You know, for audit purposes, as long as you record it using the appropriate means, the ILR handbook tells you how to do it, and it happened, and you've got evidence of the learning that's taking place. The other problem, you know, how do we prepare learners for it? How do we support them on it? And what do they do afterwards? Where's the availability of resources? Well, we'll give you a bit of guidance, but there's a lot of careers resources available, lots of resources on employability skills, and obviously I draw reference here to Learning at College, which is one of our learning products, as well as other provision. So with those sort of problems, plus the ones that you've highlighted, Sue, could you just look at some of the solutions that you've really worked well, some of these ways in which, you know, we've got the best use out of work placements?
Absolutely, and I think it's important as well to share with colleagues that it isn't all doom and gloom. We know there are many challenges out there for providers, but equally there are some solutions. I think what is critical, as we've highlighted already, that if the work experience is going to have a high profile, it's really important that there is a senior manager who has actually got that sort of responsibility, you know, without them having to do everything. But it's important that there is a senior manager that leads and helps to drive the work experience element across the study programs. And there, obviously, people can work closely with the person who has responsibility for the employer engagement. It might be one and the same, or it's a great opportunity, if not, for two colleagues is to work together and to share their thoughts. We know that the high quality work placements can be tricky to come by. However, as we've said, if you work with the employers, use the wider community and kind of like think a little bit more laterally, then quite often you can come up with a really good opportunity for the learners. And again, the governors will know people. Some of themselves might actually be employers, and I'm sure that they, would be willing to support a work experience. The way that it's actually organised, again, depends on what works for different people and different types of programmes, and equally it also has to take into account what the learner will benefit from, and again the confidence of the learner in some cases. So I've seen people who do work placement and it takes place once a week, and that can be for a term. Others prefer to actually do it in blocks. For example, I've seen in some organisations where hairdressing colleagues, the learners rather, were going out onto work experience around about the Christmas time, and then unfortunately they were being offered jobs which on one hand was good for them, but they weren't actually completing the qualifications. So there was an agreement, conversation took place with the employers and the college, and they agreed that the work experience would take place later on in the year. So they would still go and help out, so that the hairdressing employers actually had some extra pairs of hands around about the busy Christmas time, but they agreed not to then offer them the job and would give them a more detailed and thorough work experience later on in the academic year. So it just shows it's really useful to talk to people and again lay out from the beginning what it is that's actually required, and the expectations on both sides can then actually be matched. When we've got apprentices coming into the colleges and the other training providers, again a great opportunity to try and fill that place in the employer's premises with a study programme student. So again, I'm sure most employers would welcome that opportunity. They are sort of like losing a trainee for a day, so it provides a great opportunity to actually replace the skills there as well. Using social media can actually be a really good opportunity. We know most young people now will actually they use social media far more than a lot of us in organisations, so they themselves will can use that as an opportunity to look for work placement. But I do think Beej made a really relevant point that I think the organisation, the provider, should be the one that actually organises the work placement to make sure that it is relevant and fit for purpose. The work experience opportunity provides lots of evidence for demonstrating the progress towards English and maths, using digital skills, and also the development of employability skills. And as we said, it's important that you're actually recording how those skills are gained, and again you can demonstrate that there's progress over time as well. So we've already mentioned as well that we've got in most organisations a team of really experienced assessors. We've got experienced people who are actually going out and talking to employers, and I've seen one organisation recently develop an employer pledge, which I thought was a lovely thing to do. It showed commitment from the organisation to in the fact that they would still use the employers, but equally the employers were having an opportunity then to receive some training, and that again their logo was going to be used in the college documentation. But the people who were working with the apprenticeships were then committing to the organisation that they would expand those opportunities and take on board the study programme students as well. Most people in education will have a wealth of networks, so that is a fantastic way again to actually share ideas and to try and set up different solutions there. It may be that you've got two providers, for example, who aren't necessarily in competition, but they are in the same region or an area where they could actually share where they've used employers and where they've had some good work experiences set up. And Beej mentioned already there's some fantastic materials out there. We've got Learning at College and a whole range of other enrichment materials which can actually help to prepare the learners and actually get them ready for the work placement, and maybe give some different ideas as well.
Just before you go on,
sorry,
just
Beej.
before we go on, Sue, I just had a couple of things. Just going to just mention a couple of contributions. Laura, thanks very much. Laura's raised quite, I think, a very, very pertinent issue, talking a lot about construction and engineering, where very often they have great practical skills, but not so good at things like customer service or communication. And she's asked the question, would be seen as good practice if, for example, you offered a plumber or a bricklayer or someone that works in the gas fitting, say, for example, a reception job, I'd say someone like Travis Perkins, or, you know, a customer-facing job where they learnt those skills. Would that be seen as good practice? And the answer is Sue.
I think it would, most definitely. I mean, that's a really good example of actually developing those ready-to-work skills, isn't it? As I mentioned earlier, you know, we know some students have had limited opportunity to have any interaction with customers. So where you've got an environment like that, and there is that opportunity to develop those skills, then I think that would be seen as really good practice. Again, it might also kind of spark off a different idea. So you never know, a young person who does a reception role in that type of environment might actually then think, you know, there are different routes for me to take as well, still within the same industry, that they could get involved in the management side and things. So I think as well, if it does nothing else, if it helps the learner to know what to identify what they want to do in the future, or if it helps them to understand what they don't want to do, then surely that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, and I think it's a similar response to Jane. She's talking about quite a lot of the students while on the programs also have a part-time job in the relevant sector. But for example, if you said that you've got someone who's working as a plumber, but then for say just 2 days, would it be good to record as a work, the part-time job can't be recorded as work experience, but say for 2 days, they would, for example, sort out the invoices for the plumber, or do follow up on customer, what do you call it, requests to come and price jobs up. That could be seen as a good 12-hour work placement, which enhances that person's skills. So for both Laura and Jane, it's, yeah, we want to see more flexibility, more creativity. We don't always have to have the same model of work experience, because particularly in both cases you described, where there's high risks in engineering construction, the more creative and the more appropriate to that wider range of skills. If the work placement can do it, and it can do it in a couple of days, then that would be really critical. So the answer is yes to both of those. Thank you. So what kind of innovative approaches then, to sum up, have we seen that have helped to engage both employers and students? So Sue, if you look at employers, the sort of things that, just to sort of sum up some of the things we've talked about today.
Yeah, we've actually sort of covered some of this already, but it's worth just highlighting the more involvement that you can have with employers, then the more opportunities are going to be created in the future. I'm sure most people will at some point have presentations to the students who come in and do careers talks. Now it could be about a specific industry, or it could be general. I've done that quite a lot in the past, where I've been talking to employers, people that I've worked with, and they've actually come in and re-emphasised the importance of the English and maths skills. They've re-emphasised the importance of turning up on time and speaking without grunting in some cases. You know, sometimes that can be done as a presentation to a large number of students, or it could be sector specific. So again, it could be you've got one of the big employers comes in and talks to your construction students or your engineers, particularly if you're sort of finding that those students don't necessarily want to engage in work experience. Again, using those same employers or drawing on the whole range of them, get them to do some mock interviews as well. That's always really interesting. The student themselves will get really good feedback from somebody external, and they'll probably listen to them a little bit more than they will to the main college teachers as well. I've seen in some organisations actually where the employer will actually contribute to the job vacancy board. So in some organisations they've developed a whole kind of area, and they've called it like the employment zone or the job matching zone, and that's had a high sort of profile in an area, let's say for example where the refectory or the coffee shop is within the provider's premises. So again, the students can have a look and see what jobs are actually available. Now there may be jobs that they're required skilled people, or again it can be for work placement as well. And then what does work particularly well is to offer a taster in the workplace. So again, it goes back to what I've been saying about some students are not necessarily confident to go out. So if they have a little taster first, it gives an opportunity to build up the skills, to build up the relationship with the employer, and then from there you can agree whether that placement is going to take place. And it could be a good way to actually get a new employer involved as well, particularly if they're a little bit hesitant about working with young people, if they've never had any work experience before. So we've got volunteers as well, can come in from the business community, team building, charity events, all that type of thing is a great way to actually get more employers involved and build up those relationships, because I think you'll find once you've got the relationship is strong with the employer, then they will feel quite honoured and they'll be really pleased that you're actually going to them and asking them for their help in actually providing the work placement, because equally in return they know that they're going to get a really good skilled person with the right attributes that helps them to sort of fill vacancies in the future.
Could I just add there, Sue, just before you go on, one person's given a good example there. It's a rural provider where what's happened is that their, for example, performing arts and media students have helped to run the agricultural show.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Their workplace was to plan and prepare elements of the agricultural show, which was very much a local activity, and that's a great example of where they've engaged with all of the community in its broadest sense. So again, employer engagement is with all of the community. It doesn't have to be specifically with the private sector. It can be all the sectors. Thanks very much for that. Thank you.
I think as well, Beej, just to sort of re-emphasise the fact if you've got the students involved in an event like that, they are actually having a wonderful opportunity to gain even more skills than maybe they would do if they were just kind of working with one provider. So I think the more where people can use that type of activity, the better, if they're finding it quite difficult rather to actually come by a work placement. And again, that in itself can mushroom and you can get more and more students involved from different disciplines. So if we have a look at the working with the students, as we've just said, that the example there actually really meets that bullet point in terms of the students can help to design the work experience that meets their needs. And then we know that those who've actually completed work experience in the past or a good work placement will actually progress and go on and be more confident to apply for new things as well. Those students can then become mentors for new students coming to the organisation and provide some coaching and mentoring themselves. Students who actually do undertake work experience, again, can help to dispel the negative attitudes. We've all heard it, and I'm sure at some point we've all said things as well, about that phrase of like, the youth of today and that type of thing. Employers who work with the young people do find that, again, they have a better experience and an understanding of young people as well. So it works both ways, really, and I think that's really positive. Too many people quite often will damn a group of people just because there'll be one sort of like negative comment made. Where you've got good work experience happening, then it's absolutely essential. Get that out there, publicise it, put it on YouTube, show clips on your college website, and again, show those to the students before they even start to enrol at the organisation. And I think work experience, the students need to know from the beginning that that's actually part of their study programme. It's a bit like the English and maths that we reference as well. They need to know from the beginning that that's what's actually going to be involved. And then I'm sure some people have done some things like the Dragon's Den sessions, uses up and introduces a whole range of different skills as well for students. I've seen speed dating interviews take place with employers, so there is actually some really innovative approaches to setting up and getting organised with the work experience.
That's great, thanks very much, Sue. And I think there's loads of questions. I know we've gone past the time, but it actually does seem quite interesting how many questions today is raised. A couple of answers, by the way, just before we move on to one of the questions is, about safeguarding, yeah, I think it's a responsibility. Remember, you are organising the work placements for those hours to count. So as part of that responsibility, whether it be evenings or weekends or holiday, is to make sure that safeguarding provision is placed. And that obviously does raise issues. That's why I think in response to one of the questions, it certainly helps if you've got a work experience coordinator or a team, because in some cases, remember, we're trying to find 4,000 to 5,000 placements over the course of maybe 1 year or 2 years, if it's 2-year study programs. It's important that there is someone there that overviews and oversees all of those issues, including the safeguarding issues, as well as obviously the health and safety issues. And that's why, for example, I place this firmly in employer engagement, because I would expect my employer engagement team to be available right through the whole of the academic year. There would be very little what I'd call activity time there. So certainly in response to one of your questions, it's useful to have a work experience coordinator that supports both students who find their own work placements and other work placements. I think that's absolutely critical. I mentioned safeguarding. In reference to logs, how do you record the whole of the experience? ProMonitor is good. There's loads of software and there's loads of sort of like paper-based things that have been around for a long time from the old education business partnerships that I'm sure Gordon remembers. However, what I think is critical is if you do engage with a proactive employer, whether it be a small, medium, or a large organisation, one that sees the value in it, and I'll come back to a couple of points that Jeanette's raised, it is important that if you do this, and we did this a lot with people like Debenhams and Waitrose, each week we knew what the task would be of that learner, or each time they went into the school, for example, if they're doing Wednesday afternoons supporting P2 classes in art, we knew what the particular task would be set for that particular session. Then we could map it over to the English maths skills that were actually evident in being used. This immediately makes the students aware, or more aware of how important English and maths and digital skills, as well as employability skills, in addition to the vocational skills that they might be using if they're an art person, a construction person, whatever. So something as simple as a logbook, which can then have reflections on it, can use this matrix to record particular activities, because you could record the type of English that was used, the maths that was used in calculation and digital skills in terms of use of IQ. But also, it then becomes a very important source of evidence to inspectors of that more holistic and rounded approach, that all of these things are happening all over the study program. So it doesn't have to be too detailed in response to the question, but enough for the learner to be able to reflect on it so that they put their feedback in, and so does the employer. And particularly when you're using this as part of references, I make it a condition of all work placements that all people get a reference from the employer at the end of it. And I think that's critical again in terms of showing how important the engagement is with those young people. But I think a more significant issue has been raised by one or two of you, which is, well and good, we've managed to do this. What about engaging with students that have never turned up? And that's a really good question, because to some extent, are they entitled to the same elements of the study program as those people who turn up regularly? And I know certainly in my previous experience in schools and colleges, we did not allow students to go on work placements who did not have necessary attendance. However, we had to have exceptions, and Jeanette will know what I mean, because very often that's the one thing that actually will get the person to commit, because they see it as the most relevant part. Well, are they on the right study program in the first place? Would it be better to put them onto a shorter one, where maybe the most of it is the work placement, and then that gets them moving to where they might be more appropriate learners, if that isn't working for them. But to some extent, remember, I would not allow that to happen if that person would be also likely to replicate exactly the behaviour in class in the work placement, and therefore that's to affect the reputation that you have with that employer. One question that was also posed, Sue, is we're talking about 16 to 18 and 19 to 25, 19 up to 24, with high needs students. For adults, of course, it's exactly the same issue. But of course, for adults, the primary thing is to make sure that any 19 to 24s on traineeships get their work placements first. And then obviously add any adults for whom it's a core component of the vocational population. I would prioritise those. Their entitlement under enrichment is less of an issue, and if you can afford it, you do it. But that would be my sort of clear focus there. I think, but Jeanette's asked a more important question, and that is, how do we actually engage? I think you've got to see it as a key component of the employer engagement strategy. So this is not just for work placement, it's also for full cost work, and it's for obviously for apprenticeships. And, you know, I always have what I call my 8-point plan, but I always start by having clarity in my head. And that is, when I define my work placement offer, I try and understand exactly what the benefits are for each employer, whether it be a local garage, a Sainsbury's, or a local doctor's. So in other words, how can a work placement help recruitment, their reputation, development of the employer's own staff, or what I know, and you know, the employer has what we call a social partnership or social mission, then I can say, well, wait a minute, you say quite clearly on your website that you've got this wider social responsibility. Here's how you can actually do it. I then develop an appropriate business case to engage with that employer, clarity of benefits, as I say, and then I define the actual work placement offer to the employer. So the employer knows the range of work placements, and they'll see that those are flexible enough, as Sue said, to meet their specific demands in terms of the way that the year works. And then I identify which employer best matches that. So I'll say to some employers, you don't match what our young person wants. And then we have a coordinated approach across the whole of the institution. So as one of you said before, there's a single point of contact. So whoever the employer is, they know that Alison or Barry or Sid is the work experience contact inside that organisation. Employers hate it when they've got to go to more than one person. Then I have the initial engagement with the employer, where I look at the business needs, the case, and try and make sure the learner matches exactly with that employer placement. And then make sure that when the placement occurs, there's a sustainable support to that young person and the employer. So that means that you have to have that dedicated work experience coordinator that knows where the person is and how things are progressing. And then in point 8 would be to maintain that relationship with the employer by getting their involvement in feedback, the references, and when it's worked well, asking them if they're willing to use that as a case study, or get them to then join, for example, maybe a steering group in the local area. So for example, I might get the rural business development people to say, we need to try and get as many employers in the supply chain. And interestingly enough, what worked well for one large provider was that they got one large employer to offer placements, and the large employer brought 70 smaller businesses into work placements through the supply chain by just simply saying, look, we have a mission, we have a purpose, do you want to work with us? Because you're going to have to provide those work placements as well. So I think in conclusion, we need to make this part of our employer engagement strategy, have a clear vision and rationale how the experience is developed employability, and then ensure the build-up and preparation for work experience are giving equal value to the final experience. You know, I think it's just as important to do initial engagement, initial preparation, all the things that Sue talked about. And I think by using all of the other internal placements, mentoring, etc., you can make people more familiar with the workplace before they go there. And I think, again, what are you going to do with the work placement? I was talking to a colleague yesterday in engineering, which is a high-risk area. His placements have produced more future apprentices than any other placements in the college. So what has been working well in engineering in making employers aware of the talent that's available in the organisation and how that talent can fill a future need is quite critical, and that's particularly important in the high-risk areas. But I think also it's making sure the students are fully partners to it, and that engagement with the students, as Jeanette said, is critical. And if they're not willing to be fully partnering, I would not offer it to them. I would make sure that those conditions were met before. Because you only need one bad student placement to significantly affect your reputation, and that could affect future apprenticeships, etc. As well as getting those external references and then reports, again, in quite an easy way without too much extra hassle. So use things like Pro Monitor. But I think the most important thing is keep the evidence of how individual work placements, whether internal or external, have impacted on the learner. What changes have you noticed? And that is absolutely critical. So thanks very much then, Sue, for your support this morning. Anything else you want to say as the final words?
I think we've covered most of the areas. One thing that I would recommend to colleagues is use the opportunity to do a bit of an audit, really, to see where you are with your work experience. It is important. It is part of the study programme, and try and develop a policy so that everybody is really clear about how it's going to work across the organisation.
Absolutely, and I would support that fully. So thanks very much, Jeanette. You've also suggested you've got a generic logbook which students record everything. Brilliant. And again, just to shine, I want to be very clear, internal placements are okay if they're purposeful and relevant and you can show the impact, particularly if the impact has been that that person's been able to go and do an external work placement, or they've learned significant skills to build their confidence in the personal development behaviour and welfare. You can use as evidence for that. And I think, Sue, you'd agree with that as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
You want to know more about our facility, what's available at Learning College, there's a reference there for you, thank you very much. But also to make you aware of future webinars. So I think Marek, myself and Sue and other people will be involved in some more. I think effective use of integrated project work and study programs, personal development, behaviour and welfare, a more holistic approach. Sue and I will be looking at English and maths both ways.
Yep.
And our favourite, and also looking at how to make use of effective labour market intelligence to ensure better progression from study programmes and traineeships to employment and apprenticeships. And I think as one of you has raised, is that going to be a key issue in area reviews and local devolution deals? The answer is yes. So listen in on that one because that's going to be very critical. Well, thanks very much. We've gone way past the time. I'm pleased that 50 of you have stayed with us right through to the end of the webinar. Thanks very much. But again, I think this, Marek, would you agree we've generated more questions today than we've ever had? Hopefully, we've answered most of those. And one of you has asked me, you know the 8-point employer engagement thing you did, can we have a copy of it? Right, well, Marek and I will make sure we send this out with the slides. Can we do that, Marek?
Yes, we certainly can.
I mean, I may be, oh, sorry, I mean, are we still recording?
Yes. Yeah,
it's not really good though, but I will send out that 8-point plan for more effective and
we will.
Yeah. Okay then, well thanks very much then everyone. Sue, thanks very much. Thanks Mike for your support, and thanks again to those of you that subscribe us. Hopefully those of you that haven't looked at subscription will do so. Get in touch with Marek at e-memoir. And again, more materials are available if you look at our website at Learning Curve Group under the title of Learning at College. And that would support all the things we've been talking about in terms of study programs and all those other aspects of study programs. So thanks very much then.
Brilliant, thank you. And what I'll do, if it's okay with you, Sue, as well, when I distribute the slides and the video recording, I'll provide everybody with your contact details. So if anyone would like to get in touch to discuss anything further, potentially talk to you, see if you potentially go and see them, or even talk to them via the web, they can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great. I mean, if anybody wants, you know, I appreciate it's a busy time of year now for colleagues, so they can always Skype, you know, or we can talk on the phone, but it's an area that I've been supporting a lot of providers with recently, so might have some useful tips for people.
Yeah, that's great, Sue. And obviously, if any of you in colleges or other providers which are planning staff development activities, maybe at the end of June or beginning of July, and you thought this would be a useful thing to add, then obviously get in touch with either myself or Sue or Mike. We'd be happy to facilitate in any way, even if it's only, as Sue said, by using Skype or using by webinar. But again, you know, something like this you might feel would be useful. Maybe we'd certainly extend it to more than an hour because of the nature of the questions. So again, this might be a useful way of putting this into your staff development plan, you know, for an hour and a half or so. Thanks very much then everyone. Thanks Sue, thanks Mary.
Okay, thank you, bye now, see you all very soon.